Let's talk about one of the hottest debates in sports right now, the future of the WNBA, its collective bargaining agreement, and whether players are being realistic or unfairly dismissed when it comes to their demands for better pay. Former NBA great and championship-winning head coach Byron Scott recently stirred the pot by saying something a lot of people have thought, but not many have said out loud. In his words, you can't go in and demand anything when you're not making money. Now, depending on where you stand, that's either harsh but fair truth-telling, or it's a condescending dismissal of what the players have been fighting for. So let's look at what Byron Scott meant, why the WNBA is at a crossroads, and how stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are changing the economics of women's basketball, and ultimately whether the league should, or even can, meet the players' demands in the upcoming CBA. And I warn you, this isn't a black and white conversation. It's not as simple as saying pay the players more or they don't deserve it. The truth is more complicated, and it lives in the grey area between economic reality and cultural responsibility.
Clark nails it.
Allen's mid-range short. Reese another rebound. Reese puts it in.
And then steps back with the three over Bardano Stewart.
I think you can make all these demands all you want, but the bottom line is if your bottom line isn't bringing in revenue, it's kind of hard to make these demands.
The WNBA is about to enter its 30th season. For much of its history, the league has been fighting an uphill battle just to survive, let alone thrive. But if you've been paying attention over the last 2 seasons, you know that something has changed. A'ja Wilson and Nafisa Collier have established themselves as dominant forces. Meanwhile, the arrival of new generational stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese has taken the league to another level. Suddenly, we're seeing something we rarely saw before. WNBA arenas packed to capacity. Jerseys selling out online. TV ratings hitting record highs. Even casual fans who never tuned in before are now streaming games or following these players on social media. This surge of popularity has been a godsend for the WNBA Players Association, which is preparing for a collective bargaining negotiation with the league. Their current agreement expires in October of 2025, and players want what seems, on the surface, like a simple request, a bigger piece of the pie. But this is where Byron Scott enters the conversation. On his podcast, Scott gave a blunt reality check.
I think you can make all these demands all you want, but the bottom line is if your bottom line isn't bringing in revenue, it's kind of hard to make these demands. You can't continue to say you want to be paid, and you're not saying you want to be paid like guys on the NBA, but you want to be put on that level. You're not going to get revenue sharing. You're not going to get 50%. You ain't going to get it. You're at 9% now or something like that. You ain't going to get it. So I think their demands has to be I wouldn't say squash, but they have to be where they're more realistic.
Scott made it clear he wasn't against the players asking for better pay or better conditions. He even praised Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese for becoming cash cows for the league. But he stressed one key point. The WNBA is still not a profitable business. As he put it, you're not going to get revenue sharing. You're not going to get 50-50. You're at 9% now or something like that. You're not going to get it. That's the heart of the argument. Until the league makes enough money to justify it, the economics simply won't allow the kind of revenue split players are hoping for. And here's the part where a lot of people might not want to hear the truth. Sports are entertainment, but at the end of the day, they're also businesses. And businesses need to make money to sustain themselves. If a league operates at a loss year after year, it can't magically increase salaries without consequences. Those consequences might look like higher ticket prices, reduced investments in marketing, or even, in a worst case scenario, teams folding. So when Scott says you can't go in and demand when you aren't making money, he's speaking from a hard-nosed business perspective. And honestly, he's right, at least partially. But here's the other side of the coin. The WNBA players aren't asking to move mountains. They're not demanding NBA-level contracts. They're not asking for LeBron James money, Steph Curry money, or even the type of endorsement checks that NBA role players cash. What they're asking for is higher revenue share. Right now, WNBA players are reportedly taking home less than 10% of the league revenue. Compare that to the NBA, where players split revenue nearly 50-50 with owners. That's a massive disparity. So while Byron Scott is correct that the WNBA can't afford NBA-level salaries, the players are correct in saying the balance is off. They're the product. They're the reason people are showing up, buying jerseys and tuning in. Without them, there is no league. And with the surge of interest from the new generation of stars, now is the perfect time to push for more. But here's where things get tricky. The current CBA expires in October 2025. If the players and the league can't find common ground, we could be looking at a lockout, and that would be devastating. The WNBA has built more momentum in the last 2 years than in the previous decade combined. A lockout could derail all of that. Fans are finally paying attention, broadcasters are finally investing, and sponsors are finally interested. Losing a season or even a few months would be catastrophic. So while the players have every right to push hard, there's a delicate balance here. If they push too hard and the league digs in, both sides lose. And this isn't just a WNBA problem. We've seen similar debates in other sports as well, particularly women's soccer. Here's the tricky part as well. The US women's national team has been even more successful than the men's team on the international stage. At one point, they even generated more revenue than the men in certain years, especially during World Cup tournaments. And yet, despite all that success, the pay gap still existed. Why? Because global soccer economics are tilted heavily towards the men's game. The men's World Cup brings in billions of dollars more than the women's tournament. And because prize money is based on global revenue, the women's side has never been able to match it, even though they have a higher revenue share. And that's the slippery slope. Success and popularity don't always translate into financial equality, because the scale of the markets is so different. The WNBA faces a similar problem. Even with rising ratings, their numbers are still tiny compared to the NBA. That's not a knock on the league, it's just reality. So what's the solution? How do you honor the players' demands without bankrupting the league? Here's one idea: incremental growth. Instead of demanding 50-50 revenue sharing right away, the players could negotiate for a gradual increase. Maybe they bump up from 9 to 15%. Then, if certain financial milestones are hit, that share automatically increases again. This creates a win-win. Players get more money immediately while still having incentives tied to league growth. Owners feel comfortable knowing they're not overcommitting before the league can sustain it. Another solution: transparency. One of the biggest frustrations for players is not knowing the full financial picture. If the league opens its books and proves the numbers, it builds trust. Right now, there's a perception that the league might be holding out while the players sacrifice. And finally, marketing. The league has to keep pushing these stars. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are not just great players, they're cultural icons. They can carry the league the way Magic Johnson and Larry Bird carried the NBA in the 1980s, but only if the league invests properly. At the end of the day, Byron Scott is right about one thing: business comes down to money. You can't pay what you don't have. But the players are also right. They deserve a bigger cut of the money that is being made. The challenge for the WNBA in these negotiations is finding the middle ground. Pushing too far could trigger a lockout and undo years of progress. But settling for too little risks alienating the very players who make the league special. And here's what makes this debate so important. The WNBA isn't just fighting for money, it's fighting for its place in the sports landscape. It's fighting for respect, for sustainability, and for a future where little girls can dream of being Caitlin Clark or Angel Reese and know they'll be compensated fairly for their talents. The truth is, the players aren't asking for the moon, they're only asking for fairness. The question is whether the league and the economics of sports will allow it. Because if the WNBA gets this right, it could set the stage for women's sports across the globe. But if they get it wrong, all this momentum could vanish in an instant. And that's why this next CBA will be the most important moment in WNBA history. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and let us know in the comments if you believe the WNBA stars deserve more money than they're making. My name is Damian Peters, this is Basketball Network, and we'll see you in the next one.